Hey everyone, welcome to Being Matthew 25, a monthly live stream from the Presbyterian Mission Agency. I'm Diane Decker, Director of Communication for the Mission Agency.
And I am Diane Moffett, President and Executive Director of the Mission Agency. We're thrilled you are joining us today as we look back at some of the highlights of our first year of Being Matthew 25 live stream.
But first, we want to thank you for joining us each month over the last year and helping to make what really started as an experiment a success. We've averaged a reach of 3,000 views a month. And I have to be honest, I never imagined that we would reach so many people. And Diane, I also want to thank you for being part of Being Matthew 25. It's been an honor co hosting with you, and I look forward to what 2023 has in store. But as you said, before we get to our look back on 2022, we've got some news that you, our viewers, can use. Diane?
Yeah, I hope that you will be excited as I am about that. I want to share with you the new Being Matthew 25 iPhone app. You can get worship and Bible study and small group resources and videos and stories right at your fingertips. Get notified on the latest Matthew 25 opportunities and search for Matthew 25 churches across the nation, all within the Being Matthew 25 iPhone app. Best of all, the app is totally free. You just need to download the Being Matthew 25 iPhone app today at your iPhone store. So please make sure you do it. It's a great, great app.
It is. It's a wonderful resource. And speaking of great resources, everyone needs to check out the new podcast titled A Year with Matthew 25. This is a podcast that's produced by our friend David Gambrell, and it connects readings from the lectionary scripture with the PCUSA's Matthew 25 vision of building congregational vitality, dismantling structural racism, and eradicating systemic poverty. This weekly podcast is designed for devotional use, formation for a church service, and preparation for worship for church members and leaders. So check out A Year with Matthew 25 podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Google Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And again, it's called A Year with Matthew 25.
I'm going to have to check that out. Back in
good.
January, yeah, absolutely. I know that'll be very helpful for preparing for worship and other worship experiences. Back in January, we embarked on a new journey to connect with our members, presbyteries, and churches. And we wanted a new and fresh way to tell the stories of our churches and engage with those who were doing the work and answer some questions folks might have about what does it mean to be Matthew 25?
That's right. When we began this, Diane, as you know, I wasn't expecting the amazing conversations and stories of transformation that we've heard along our way. And our very first episode back in January featured Central Presbyterian Church in Princeton, Kentucky. And unfortunately, in December of 2021, Princeton and several other towns in Kentucky were devastated by some of the strongest tornadoes to hit Kentucky in recent memory.
Yeah.
And we recently caught up with another Matthew 25 church in Western Kentucky to see how they are helping to address the ongoing needs after tornadoes. First Presbyterian Church in Calvert City is a 10-person congregation that decided to offer their building as a place for volunteers to stay when they came to help with repair and rebuilding after the storm.
Today, we're going to commission the church that serves as a Presbyterian Disaster Assistant volunteer host site and the host site coordinator, Ms. Renata. When we commission you, we grant you authority, allowing you to act on behalf of another. God commissions people to go for God and God's mission to the world.
On December 10th, a large tornado was down on the ground for an extended amount of miles. Mayfield received the bulk of the damage, and then it hit Marshall and then onto the Princeton area.
And when I travel down the main interstate, you can see the damage, a lot of the damage, and how it's so quiet in those areas where the damage done. You wonder what happened, where are the people?
We was bombarded with volunteers from all over during the first couple of months. And then after that, disasters started happening everywhere else around the United States. And so people tend to follow them, and we're still stuck here. We still need help. Families need homes.
You know, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homes that are damaged, and the people who own them can't get them fixed because they're elderly or they're poor, and they just don't have the money or the insurance, or don't see a way in the world that they could ever pay a loan back. So we just need people's help.
Early on in the disaster phase, we send our specially trained volunteers to do some initial work and assessment of what churches, what parts of the community, what populations are going to need the most help. The second phase of disaster ministry is the long-term recovery phase. Now, this phase can last for months, sometimes even years, as groups and communities begin to do the work that they can't do initially. That's when volunteer host sites like PDA's host sites open up and bring outside folks into communities to help with the restorative, reparative, recovery work.
And here we are, this little church, 10 people, 10 members, 5 or 6 people coming to Sunday, and we got all these empty rooms. And so we had a session meeting, and we decided that it would be almost criminal not to do something so we could have a host site and have a place where we could put people up so that they could work on these homes.
When I first came here and met with them, they were completely honest and said, we can't do this alone. You know, we will open our doors, we will let you use our building, but we need help. And I went to PDA and I went to the Presbytery, and they said, this is a great location for a host site. Let's do it. Let's do whatever we can do to help to get it up and running.
We want to make it as much like home as possible. We want everybody to be comfortable, and we want them to be able to rest after they spend a long day volunteering.
Today, we are commissioning First Presbyterian Church in Calvert City as an official PDA host site.
We pray for the church facilities, O God. May the beds provide a safe and comfortable sleep to volunteers so that they may wake up refreshed to participate in your mission. May the showers provide warm water so the volunteers may remain clean and healthy as they refresh for another day's labor. May the kitchen and the dining facilities provide space for nourishment and communion. May the community spaces foster love, community, reflection, and fellowship. May this PDA volunteer host site help the communities in Western Kentucky recover from these disasters of tornadoes.
This is something we haven't done before with other host sites, but see the need to do in our ministry. We often put months of effort into setting up and opening up and renovating spaces to become host sites. And we feel that it's important to take a moment to pray, to commission, and to mark this occasion as the official opening of this host site.
It's a wonderful host site. They really have, with so few people in the congregation, have really gotten it together. It's clean and cozy, and I would live here for a week. In fact, I'm going to. I'm going to bring my church here.
You always hear you're to be the feet and hands of Jesus, and this is truly being the feet and hands of Jesus because you're meeting needs, and God has provided what's necessary to meet those needs. You're just helping implement the process to get the needs taken care of.
Wow. That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing.
Powerful, powerful.
Yeah. You know, we talk about congregational vitality is not dependent upon how many members or how large your budget, but your faithfulness
That's right.
to be a part of the community and make a difference. So grateful for the ministry that we see coming forward. I'm going to continue to hold the people of Kentucky. I know you will, and I hope those who are listening will hold the people of Kentucky and all those who are experiencing natural disasters in our prayers. We had some tornadoes this past week in the southern states, New Orleans and Mississippi and some other places. It takes a long time to recover from this
That's
type
ex-
of devastation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting ready to say.
Yeah.
It's not just the months, the days, the weeks, or a month after that storm
It's
comes through.
years.
It's
It's
that's right. It's
years.
years,
It's
years.
years to recover. So we're just so thankful for the work of the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance and congregations that open their doors and become sites where they can help, just as we've
And
just.
if a little 10-member congregation can be the hands and feet of Jesus, as one of their members said, it seemed like it would be almost a crime not to. Uh,
Absolutely.
if a little 10-member congregation can do it, anybody can do it. And
Absolutely.
so
It has
there's
to do with your mind, your
yep,
will, your
yep.
mental load.
Get creative. It seems like they looked around and said, well, we're in the middle of this. We've got a place where we could open up. We've got a lot of rooms. Well, what would it look like if we did this? And they dreamed a little bit. Creative imagination can go a
Absolutely.
long way.
So shout out to the Church of Culver City, Presbyterian
Yes,
Church of Culver City, for all that they are doing, and for many other churches who are doing some great ministry. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, now we turn to perhaps my personal favorite show of the year, where I got to sit down with you, Diane, and the stated clerk for an hour-long
I
interview.
remember
I know
that.
we said it was just going to be 20 minutes, but it was such a great conversation.
Yeah.
So my interview with you and the stated clerk on what we called the state of the church, and it was an incredible conversation. And I'm still not sure how we did so well matching our wardrobe that day without discussing it at all. Great
Great
minds think
minds think
alike.
alike.
Let's take a look at this at our conversation.
Talking about social justice and state clerk, I know that you are very much believe that that is an act of faith, to be present and advocating for those who are at the margins. That is part of our call as disciples of Christ. What do you say to folks who would say, yes, but that's a little too much. Now we're getting into politics. Now you're asking me to come out of my comfort zone. What can you respond to that?
Well, let me first thank you for helping me with that. The word comfort zone is not even real in our societal concept. And it's not even connected deeply to our own faith. I read Jesus from the beginning of his ministry. He was a person that went into a temple. And we don't know the total words that he shared with those individuals. What we do know is that the inauguration of his ministry in some ways was capsulized by some words that angered people in that temple. And as a result, they were there to put him to death in that moment. So forget about crucifixion and all of these other things that happened later. They were going to kill him at the beginning of his first sermon. I could not imagine having gone into the pulpit the first time that I preached my first sermon and given the words that somebody would have been running me out of town and asking me to actually jump off of a cliff. That's what it ended up being. I think what this period has called us to, if we are really thinking, is to a really radical transformation of the church, a calling to be daring and challenging powers and principalities to be what they have to be for the sake of building people and the lives of people in communities. And I've seen everything that everyone else has seen, and that's been children in cages at the border, seeing now what is happening in the Ukraine. We are seeing over and over and over again an African American woman, the first that will join the Supreme Court of the United States of America, just beaten down all during the substance of a hearing to really give her the right to be on the Supreme Court, much of which had to do with nothing. We have a lot of pieces of evil in this world right now that we're having to deal with. And the church is confronted with that. We are supposed to be the holy place in the community. We are supposed to be the place that gives communion to remember Jesus. We are the place that buries people. We are the place that lifts up those who have been lost. But there is something in us in this period that draws us so close to what we think should be normalcy. And again, getting back to this pandemic, what it taught us is that the normalcy that we think we have is really not there. We live from day to day. I can be here right now talking to you, and in 5 minutes, I'm gone. And because my life is not mine. So the question I think we have to raise when we're talking about the issues of how we read our scriptures, how we understand the faith, that the institution that we serve is not simply here to be preserved. The institution is to actually be willing, as Jesus has taught, to lose their life in order that others might gain a life. And I think that's the challenge of the church. What are we willing to give up? What are we willing to lose? What are we willing, even if the doors sometimes have to be closed? Because we've given away everything we have, and we have nothing else to give. There's something about the servant leadership and the expectation of an institution like the Church of Jesus Christ that calls us to something much deeper, even at the risk of losing our own life, even at the risk of losing our temple, even at the risk of losing our power and our standing in a community and our wealthy congregation that we brag about how much money we have in this denomination. I think we have to begin to risk our lives for the sake of the gospel, and we're nowhere near that right now, to be honest with you, in Christendom, not just in the Presbyterian, but throughout Christendom.
How do we get there? How do you get folks to the point where they're willing to risk their life for that? You know, we have people signing up to go into the military, that part of that is to risk their life. But we in the church are seeing numbers of, engaged in membership dwindling across the U.S., across denominations. And you say this is, we need to get Christendom to a place where people are willing to lose their lives. How do we get there?
The Bible reminds us always that we have to engage in prayer and supplication. It's not easy. I think sometimes what will happen at the end of my own life with my daughter, who I love dearly, and a lot of my preparation and the preparation of my wife, we're all about trying to prepare for her life right now, and we're giving a lot of things to make that happen. And we've done a lot of things to make that happen. But there's something in that love ethic that drives us to do that, and I think we as a church have to learn how to love again, not have big barns and all of these kinds of things, or the building of great temples. But how do we learn to love those who are in our midst, however they may come? And how are we willing to give of ourselves and of the church, even at the risk of losing the church? I think that's the challenge, and that's the kind of love that's required in order to make it.
And that to me means that you got to be with God. That's not something that we can do. It's a part of the inner transformation that happens when the human encounters the holy and does divinity. When we have that transfer, that love for God, that love for Jesus, that love that says, I will invest this. I will give all of this because I see something, I know someone, I have seen in my own imagination, what life really is all about. That is so deeply spiritual. You cannot fake that. And you talk about that love ethic. It's a relationship. It's the relationship that you have with God, just as you have with your daughter, and I have with my children. You can see glimpses of it in that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even much deeper, much more profound. We have got to really, really embrace the spiritual disciplines as a way of life. It cannot be left up into the head.
Right.
It has to be an encounter and an experience that moves people to really take up the cross. Jesus is very clear. This new narrative, I'm saying we need a new narrative, but not really. I'm saying, what does faithfulness require of us in terms of discipleship? What does it mean to follow Jesus? Jesus was not executed on a Roman cross because he merely prayed. His prayers led him down a path to encounter and engage the principalities and powers that would take away the hope of God's people. It was out of that, for the joy of that somebody would get it,
Mm-hmm.
that he said, I'm going to give it all. For the possibility that, someone will get it, whether it's our own children or someone, you give it. And so we are at a time, again, where we've got to critically reflect. What does it mean? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? Jesus never shied away from controversy. He never shied away. He stood his ground, right? Yeah, he stood his ground. In the midst of that, he never said, oh, this is too much. This is going to be... No, this is the word of God. Now y'all want to do something else, but I'm seeing you devour your widows' houses. I'm seeing how your laws are exploiting people. No, he called it out, and he called it out in such a way as not to say, to condemn, but that the world could wake up to a new possibility to where God's perspective and God's principle, where God is coming from, God's kingdom or God's kingdom. So I think, that's going to be very important. We can't, for lack of a better term, and I'm not suggesting that everyone is doing this, even on a conscious level, but you can't play church. Mm-hmm. It's got to be more than a role. Mm-hmm. And I think that's challenging for all of us. What does that mean to do that? Mm-hmm. And it requires that encounter daily.
I need you to know, Diane, I reflect on that conversation at least weekly. And without fail, the two things that I hear in my head is the stated clerk's voice saying, we as a church have got to learn to love again. And you saying, we can't play church. And I just love how you point us back to the basics. The spiritual disciplines. What does it mean to be disciples? Such an incredibly powerful conversation. It was truly an honor for me to be part of that conversation. And my thanks again to you and to the stated clerk for taking the time to sit down with me. I appreciate it. Mm-hmm. So we're going to look now toward the Matthew 25 foci of building vital congregations. Building vital congregations means meeting the needs of our community, going beyond the church building to the community. And back in October, we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of 1,001 new worshiping communities, and we highlighted several that are taking the gospel to the streets in a way that meets folks where they are. And one of the most incredible communities is Wild Goose Community, a dying church that was brought back to life. Let's take a look.
A little country church on the road to nowhere. Literally, the church was built in horse and buggy days and is no longer on the way to anywhere. It was standing at death's door. So the presbytery locked it, put the for sale sign up, and let the fire die out. But if there's one thing God's good at, it's resurrecting the dead. Out of the ashes, Wild Goose took flight. as part of the 1001 New Worshiping Communities initiative.
For the presbytery, the old congregation had lived out its life. It had come to an end. And so this was an opportunity in Wild Goose to do something new and fresh, a resurrection moment in the Appalachian culture and style.
Churched and unchurched alike are drawn to our casual Tuesday evening worship services. We call them uprisings.
I love that so many different types of people have come together to form this brand new awesome community.
I haven't been to church in the last 30 years to speak of, and I've rarely missed a night since I've been coming here.
In an atmosphere of authentic Christian community, our Wild Goose family celebrates God in the context of local culture.
One of the main things here is the good food and the good fellowship.
I just love Wild Goose and where we have the old hymns played with bluegrass music.
Rocking chairs, bluegrass music, square dancing, potluck suppers, we do it all as we gather to worship Jesus and experience the beauty of God's creation.
The church in the community. You don't find this everywhere. It's a great connection.
Wild Goose, a country church sharing the good news of Jesus with those on the road to somewhere outside traditional church.
Good at resurrecting the dead.
That's right.
What a ministry. And, you know, I personally experienced that back in 1987 when I was a student pastor, a couple of years before that, and the church was supposed to close. That church was open. We called an associate pastor. In fact, I just installed or did the sermon for him as he moved to another church. But just send me back down memory lane, because I know what God is able to do. When you have a made up mind and people who love God and love Jesus and want to serve,
that's right.
It's just a way. So that's so powerful. Dee, we live in a world, you know, that in the midst of all that we're going through, and as we look at Matthew 25 and really centering those who are on the margins, we take so much for granted, but so many people don't have the equal access to education and transportation and fresh food and financial resources and clean air or water and all the things that so many of us take for granted, like affordable housing even. So as I think about what God has done in Wild Goose and what God did with the Elmhurst Presbyterian Church, in my case, and I'm sure there are many others, I realize that every church can do something. And certainly presbyteries can do something to really speak to the community and be relevant. And so I'm thinking about the idea of affordable housing. And I remember this lack of access to housing creates generational cycles of poverty and a racial wealth gap that are systemic in nature. And so we know that an individual cannot change their economic and social location easily by just working harder. But I'm thinking as we look back on this year and some of the wonderful stories that have been told, I'm reminded of the Denver Presbytery, how Denver Presbytery is addressing poverty and the lack of affordable housing in a unique and systemic way. And by the way, Pacific Presbytery is doing the same thing in Southern California. It's amazing, but let's hear, because we got a chance to talk with folks from Denver Presbytery. Let's hear straight from them some of the things that they are doing.
Interfaith Alliance did a study of the greatest need in the Denver metro area, and it was named affordable housing is the greatest need in this community.
They said the median house price was going to be around $1 million.
My wife and I make above the median income, and we cannot afford a single family home in the city of Aurora.
Pastor Wayne Laws brought the idea to us from the Interfaith Alliance when they started this thing called the Congregational Land Campaign. Like 5,000 acres of unused land that worship communities have that could be leveraged for affordable housing. I'm like, well, we've got 2 acres. We were able to run with that. We're like, okay, they need land. We have land. We have a gift. We understand that land not as ours as ownership, but it's a gift from God to be shared for the common good.
When we talked with Habitat, we very quickly recognized that their vision and their mission for this land aligned with ours. They weren't coming in this hoping to make a quick dollar, which has been part of the problem with some affordable housing here in the metro area.
This has been about a 4-year process. We had a lot of pushback from our neighbors. The immediate neighbors in our neighborhood were not too excited. They were all about supporting Habitat. They were all about supporting affordable housing. They did not want it to happen in their neighborhood. When the Matthew 25 in the presbytery was able to support us in getting the vote to rezone our land from R1 to R2, that was the final push that we needed to get this through. And that's that systemic change, right? Because if you look in our neighborhood, we're in an R1 zoning, which is big houses, big lots, and that's exclusionary zoning.
Matthew 25 is our opportunity to really address structural change.
Then when the Matthew 25 group from our presbytery became involved, it kind of put even more people together working towards the finalization of this project.
So the first thing we did was to write a letter, and we sent that off to the city council. We talked with Wayne. He said, well, there's going to be testimonies. We had 3 churches plus several ministers of Word and Sacrament. We had other elders from other churches that live in Aurora write their emails to the city council or to make some testimony.
I gotta give credit to the church and also to Habitat for the amazing amount of community outreach that they actually engaged in.
And as you start thinking about this ripple that we've thrown into this pond, and in a year from now, hopefully we're going to see homes going up on that. We start with 20 families getting the stability of home ownership and the security and it comes with that. This is going to have an impact generations from now.
A text in the Bible that I know it in Spanish, so por sus frutos los conoceréis, by their fruits I shall know them. Being able to assist with families that need affordable housing, that is fruit.
Most cities, it is illegal to build this missing middle housing that we're getting here on this property. You can't do duplexes anymore. You can't do triplexes or quadplexes. You can't do live-work housing. You can't do cottage homes. All of that is illegal because of the zoning codes. And having stable housing is the foundation to having a successful life.
And now we're going to have a community on this property that calls this place home. People that have never been able to be homeowners before. This could transform not only their family, but their next generation and their grandchildren. So we're excited. I mean, I got goosebumps right now just thinking about it. We couldn't have done it without the support of the Matthew 25 initiative in the Denver Presbytery. And we couldn't have done it without the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado, without Habitat for Humanity. And if you can look at your resources that you have, and you can partner that with the needs of your community, then you can together, through a Matthew 25 initiative, partake in changing the structures and systems of oppression and injustice that perpetuate poverty or perpetuate racism.
Wow. That's powerful.
Such an incredible story of different churches coming together, looking at the nonprofits in their community and saying, we have this land, what could we do with it? And everybody coming together with the same vision, the same goal, and saying, we're going to partner together to create systemic change, going to the government and saying, we've got to get this land rezoned. And that was really the only way that they could make that happen, was to get get it rezoned from R1 to R2. And as she said, there were folks that said, oh yeah, we're all about, helping the houseless, and we're all about, Habitat for Humanity, but not in my backyard.
That's
And
pretty standard, as we listen to folks who have been dealing with congregational vitality that moves them into dealing with the eradication of poverty. And we're going to look at, I know, dismantling structural racism too, as we reflect on the year. You'll find that that's the issue, that people, they want to change, they want to help people heal, they want to help people get better or have homes and what have you. But the process of if it impacts or their lives and causes them any kind of discomfort, then we get a lot of kickback. And that is pretty much the story. So that's the reason why I'm so grateful for those entities, the presbyteries and congregations and groups who are truly doing the Matthew 25 work, because almost in every case they have gotten pushback. But because they're partnerships in the community, because you can't do this by yourself. You need to do this in partnership with other churches, other faith communities, other not-for-profits. Because of those partnerships and the strength of them, they have been able to, if need be, go to the halls of government, do whatever they need to do in order to get the change happening. And so I'm just really grateful, because it's not like, oh, we want to do this and it's going to be easy. No, people are going to give you all kinds of, problems and so forth. But just so grateful. Again, shout out to the Denver Presbytery and all of the churches and the Habitat for Humanity and others who helped to make their dream a reality of being able to assist and to eradicate systemic poverty and allow people to own their homes and to stimulate that generational wealth. Yeah.
Diane, you brought up that we do often get asked, what is structural racism, and how do we fight against it? Well, structural racism is the normalization of racism within institutions and structures. And what the Denver Presbytery was facing was exactly that. It was institutional poverty, structural racism. And once racism is structural and institutional, it creates ongoing and persistent inequality. And that this normalization happens after years and years and decades and even centuries of one group of people having advantages over other groups of people. In February, we shared the story of Knox Presbyterian Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. I had the pleasure of serving Knox for 3 years as the director of Christian education. And I know well that Knox is a predominantly white church that has been working to end structural racism since learning about a gift that helped construct the church over a century ago. And this gift was intended for white people only. Let's hear about this more in depth about this powerful story. It's incredible.
So in the will, it was $22,000. It was 100 years ago, so in today's dollars, we're talking about probably $250,000. There was some lore in the congregation about this gift, and that there was some racist component to the gift. We went into our archives and found the will, and that's when we saw the language of the will explicitly states that it is to be for the white race only, a church that is of the white race only. This is a story that in our congregation allows us to talk about structural racism in a way that has particular relevance for us. We, as a present-day congregation, are continuing to benefit from the wealth that we were given in this gift, and that's structural racism. And that really is the piece that I think we've got to stop and confess and lament, is that the accumulation of wealth in this way. We have committed to a racial justice ministry that has a sort of three-part mandate, and it's to listen, to learn, and to act. And as part of that, we've called our congregation to add $50,000 to our budget on an annual basis to support the work of racial justice that our congregation is beginning. It was our feeling that, if we were to do something like try to make this payment as a one-time commitment, that we might fall into the trap of saying, okay, we did this, so we're not racist anymore.
It was important to the task force that we build this into the fabric of our church and that we change the thinking and the way we look at racial justice instead of just giving a bunch of money and then walking away. How do we make this part of our church? And when we came to the action part, we thought a large part of it was sharing our story and telling people, well, this is how our church benefited 100 years ago. This is how we were able to build this congregation and have all of these blessings and gifts. And this isn't right. Racism is not a Christian act. We benefited from this anti-Christian act.
One of the things that is said about racism and the way that it works is that there's so much harm done by more progressive white people who want to look back at history, and the knee-jerk reaction around a story like this is to say that's not who we are anymore. And thanks be to God, if this happened again, our congregation would have reacted differently. Who knows if that's true? We may have changed our hearts and do not believe in the same racist things people thought in the past, but the reality is that we took the money. 100 years later, we continue to benefit from the property that was built with that money and the way that its value has grown over time. We know that the benefits of a gift like this keep on growing. And we could not have accepted the money in the first place, except that we were white.
I mean, I'm an emotional person, I'm a fixer, and so I had an immediate visceral reaction to the news that our church had been a part of an activity such as that. It's become more internalized for me as far as the importance of it. I notice that I see it everywhere. I see injustice and racism everywhere.
I gotta say, I was pretty upset by it. I was moved to tears. The church is very much a part of their life, and they're active in the youth groups. And so to hear that, even though it was 100 years ago, to hear that they were disqualified from all of that, it was upsetting. And it made me angry. It was hard emotional work, it was hard spiritual work, but we thought it was necessary work. Racial injustice needs to be addressed. It needs to be looked at very closely and studied, and we need to do our best to change it.
The fact that our church accepted that gift and really accepted the gift without question was very, very disturbing. I had always kind of thought of myself as a non-prejudiced person. I'm not a racist, and I'd done some of the head work around that. What the next church conference did was show me that that wasn't quite enough, that there's some heart that needed to be worked on as well. Some of this I learn about just from observing through our relationship with Third Presbyterian Church, the inequities in the neighborhoods.
It was new news for me, and it was, a little sad a little bit that, it was for that only purpose, but I felt confident in the relationship that I have with Knox Presbyterian Church. So that's just overrides a lot of things. Yes, Yes, it's definitely impacting the future. The relationship is not just impacted the church, but it impacted the community because people know that some of our kids grew up as they're adults now, got impacted by our relationship with Knox. We have to go out in the public, not behind these walls talking and hanging out together. We got to go outside these walls and do things out and about. If we want to try to make a difference for the future, what do we do now to make it better? Is start performing togetherness and love on the stage that God has given us right now. No matter where you are, start performing love and togetherness on each and every one of our stages.
You know, one of the hardest things in this is, to have the amount of history that we do with Third, and to look back and to wonder how many times we've been white church helping black church, throwing our weight around and unaware of the ways we've been doing things that are hurtful. I hope and pray that the acknowledgement of this racist history and this structural racism in our present continues to open our conversations so that we can continue to be in ministry with Third Presbyterian and not to work on some partnership that prioritizes us, but to really be engaged with what that community knows that they need and to work together toward those needs. When you look at the Matthew 25 initiatives and the emphasis to actively acknowledge the role of structural racism in the realities of poverty is really important. And to look at congregational vitality and see the way that members of our church have been excited to feel like they're having a conversation that is real and is important. And that's the kind of thing that helps church to feel vital.
I have a niece who's married to a black man, and he lives in primarily a white neighborhood, and it's disturbing. And there was 1 month where my niece tracked. He was stopped 17 times in 1 month on his way home from work by the same police officer in Louisville, Kentucky. So it's personal.
I have listened to that video before, but each time I listen, I gain new insight. And one of the things that I was thinking about is in accepting the gift for the white race only, whoever gave that gift, made that clear delineation. But we've gotten many gifts, and most of the gifts have been, of course, when I say we, I'm talking about the Presbyterian Church USA, particularly the mission agency. And those gifts were given with an understanding that it was for the white race, unless otherwise specified. And that person simply stated what that was and was restricting and making sure that people understood that. But I believe that there was an implied understanding, just as I listen to and reflect upon the evolution of this church as it relates to racism and the water that we all swim in and how we all have been so negatively impacted by it. So I'm really grateful for Knox, for the honesty of the people, for their willingness to step up and to truly be partners with Third and the work that they're doing. And I'm trusting that there are other partnerships that are rising up around the church and the world, because this thing is real, and racism really is a sin because it denies the beauty of all God's creation. And one race or people or group decides to dominate over another based upon race. That's not our place. God is alone, is God of creation. So it's really interesting. So I am grateful for Matthew 25, congregational vitality, making people understand that following Jesus is about engaging the community, dealing with issues of systemic poverty, which we see he did, and of course, dealing with relationships with people, because that's what racism is all about. So repair is so important when we look at the impact of racism now and historically. Repair from that historical harm.
Right.
It's what it means to be a Matthew 25 church. And
Yeah,
so
it's not that's the thing that I love, just to intersect here real quick. That's the thing I love about, how Knox handled the situation was they did not stop at acknowledgement. They decided, this is
yeah,
wrong, this was a sin, and we want to do our part to help repair.
yeah. I mean, quite frankly, our church has always acknowledged it.
Mhm.
But I think what
Right.
Matthew 25 in this day and time is doing is simply saying that it is not enough to acknowledge
Absolutely.
and to confess
Mhm.
that racism is wrong. We've got to move from looking at the problem to repairing the
Mhm.
problem. We've got to put energy, and we've got to put intellect, and we've got to put spiritual awareness, all of that stuff, our very
We
best into how is it that we, guided by the Holy Spirit, engage in repairing the world, building the kingdom, or the kingdom as Jesus
Right.
referred to it,
And
so
I
that people do flourish and live abundantly.
And I think that's the part where Carrie Duke, a member of ruling elder at Knox, said, "I had the head knowledge. I could
Right.
intel I didn't have the heart knowledge." And I think it's when we decide to get real serious about this, right, and get into the heart knowledge where, as Carrie said at the end, it becomes personal. As Heidi said, all of a sudden, I internalize this and I look around and I can't not see it. And that's where we begin to be guided by the Spirit and say, this can no longer stand. So yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
You're right, Dee. I mean, I think it has to be, embodied on a visceral level to feel it, whether we have children or people, but just to really feel how wrong it is, and how when it's modeled through the colonial kind of approach that the church had, it has embedded that seed in so
Mhm.
many people too, that people of color will internalize their inferiority. I mean, we're coming out of that now. I mean, but there's still a
Thanks be to
lot of
God.
it implied in it. Well, we were able to survive because we didn't believe the lie, right? I mean, that's how we
Mhm.
were able to survive. But still, the affirmation, not just the survival, but the thriving, is what we're seeing right now. So it's real exciting to see the church say we can no longer put our head in the sand, confess that it's wrong, and then run and do what we normally do. We have to do business differently, and we've got to make sure that resources are getting to those who have been historically marginalized in a variety, whether it's education, whether it's finance, whether it's employment, whether it's health. Structural racism has negative impact, the data indicates, for people of color. I mean, it's
Mhm.
just it's constant. So I'm glad we're doing something. So I want to kind of shift this a little bit and say that to everyone who may be listening, many of you know that the PMA announced back in October. That's PMA is Presbyterian Mission Agency, just in case we have some new listeners. Back in October, the hiring of a new director for the Center of Repair of Historical Harms. That is the Reverend Jermaine Ross Alum. And I am just so excited about all the gifts that he brings, his scholarship, his integrity, his experience in working with communities, building things from the ground up. But anyway, the Center for Repair of Historical Harms is a result of an 18-month strategic planning process. We called it the Vision Implementation Process that the Presbyterian Mission Agency did almost 18 months ago. It stretched across the denomination in terms of the participation of folks. We had pastors, Presbyterian leaders, Senate educators, youth workers, scholars, you name it, as a part of this process. And It is also, the center is also a part of the 2023-24 mission work plan, which is like our strategic plan that was approved this past July in the 225th General Assembly. The Center for Repair of Historical Harms will use a variety of approaches to facilitate the kind of dialogue in virtual spaces as well as in person that will hopefully, again, move us not to just talk, but move us to tangible, relevant action that impacts the lives of those who have been harmed by historical racism. So I want you to hear, let's hear a little bit more from the Reverend Ross Allam about why this is the time to have a center for repair of historical harm. I believe we've got a video.
One of the most important reasons why this is the time for opening the Center of Repair is because it helps us live into the vision of Matthew 25. Matthew 25 tells us that not only should we be feeding the hungry and giving relief to those who are poor and doing all of those things that justice requires, but it also lets us know that we can't go forward as a nation or as a Christian people if we don't repair the damage that we've done to our world. So it's one thing to acknowledge that we should do acts of charity, which are very important, but in addition to charity, we're also called to acts of justice. And so we look at ourselves nowadays, and we don't start with what others are doing wrong, but we ask ourselves, what have we done as Christians? And what have we done specifically as Presbyterians that has caused damage that prevents others from living fully into the life that God has given them? And so the Center for Repair is a way that we celebrate an opportunity to finally get right some of those things that people have believed for decades and even centuries can never be made right again. So the opening of the Center for Repair is really a celebration that we have multiple ways to live into the vision of Matthew 25. Not only to be people of charity, but to be people of justice who can look at ourselves in the mirror, see what we've done wrong, and be grateful to God for one more opportunity to get it right and to make our relationships with one another right and stronger so that the body of Christ can grow and so that we can invite others into a world where repair is a normal way of thinking about how we live together.
I'm really looking forward to the Center for Repair getting up and on its feet and going in 2023. And I just can't wait to the work that Jermaine has done to already has been phenomenal. And I'm really looking forward to what he brings and his team brings to us in 2023. And Diane, I'm also really excited about a new project that we have been invited to participate in, that we've been involved in, called Viewpoint. You want to tell folks more about that?
Yeah, that's right, Dee. Based upon the work our churches are doing to eradicate systemic poverty and dismantle structural racism, as part of the Matthew 25 movement, the Presbyterian Mission Agency, as part of PCUSA, was chosen to participate in a short form documentary series titled Viewpoint, public broadcasting television series. And so as public television, it will be broadcast in all 50 states in early 2023. And it's estimated, get this, to reach for 1 year 60 million households. So 60 million people will know that the Presbyterian Church USA is about the work of the gospel, is about Matthew 25. Wow, I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the Viewpoint series is hosted by actor Dennis Quaid and focuses on faith-based organizations that are making a difference in their communities. And we are certainly doing that with the Matthew 25 movement.
Absolutely. Filming took place, just so our listeners will know, this past Thursday in November 10th at 100 Witherspoon. And the final short form documentary will be released sometime in late January, early February 2023.
Yeah.
So.
And In addition to that, we will also release a 1-minute educational commercial segments, which will air on 400 times during peak and prime time on channels such as CNN, MSNBC, the Learning Channel, Discovery Channel, with an estimated reach of over 84 million homes beginning in early 2023. So with Viewpoint, we're working on the short form doc with Dennis Quaid, these educational commercials, also an email campaign that will get, they say, we hope up to 1 million video emails to a narrow audience. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, absolutely. In 2023, this places us to reach more than 200 million households. If you think about all of the commercials, the documentary series itself, and the email campaign. So we're looking to reach more people, 200 million households, with our Matthew 25 vision, telling the story of how the Presbyterian Church USA is actively engaging and transforming the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Amen. God is truly, truly doing a new thing. And as Christians, we live with the hope that the impossible is possible. One way we do this is by being a revolutionary force in our world to bring about justice and equity and peace as we represent Christ to the world. So, as we close our episode and 2022, we bring you a prayer from our February episode called Make Me a Channel of Disturbance. As we live into this new year, may it be so.
Absolutely. And Happy New Year and blessed Advent season to everyone, too.
Holy One, make me a channel of disturbance.
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 Make me a channel of disturbance. Where there is apathy, let me provoke.
Where there is compliance, let me bring questioning. Where there is silence, may I be a voice.
Where there is too much comfort and too little action, grant disruption.
Where there are doors closed and hearts locked, grant the willingness to listen.
When laws dictate and pain is overlooked, when tradition speaks louder than need, grant that I may seek rather to do justice than to talk about it.
Disturb us, O God.
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 Disturb us to be with as well as for the alienated.
To love the unlovable as well as the lovely.
Amado Dios, make me a channel of disturbance.
Make me a channel of disturbance.
Make me a channel of disturbance.
Holy God, make me a channel of disturbance.